that we have 4 of you, so we can start. All right, at this time, I'll call the Anacortes City Council meeting for September 20th, 2021 to order. Ms. Hunt, would you take the roll?
Mr. Carter,
Here.
Mr. Young, Mr. Walters, Ms. Cleland McGrath,
Here.
Ms. Moulton,
Here.
Mr. McDougall,
Here.
Mr. Miller. Thank you.
All right, would you all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? All right, so we'll move on. Yes, Carolyn.
I'd like to make a motion to excuse Councilmember Young from tonight's meeting.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to excuse Councilman Young. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. At this time, we'll move on to item 3. COVID-19 update is the only announcement I have this evening. Okay, as of September 20th, today, the state of Washington reports 553,326 cases of COVID-19 since March of 2020 and 7,201 deaths. To date, the state vaccination rate is 75.8% of population 12 and up have received at least one dose, and 68.9% are fully vaccinated. So that's an improvement. That's good. Boosters are not currently recommended for any COVID-19 vaccines in the United States. However, that may change soon, pending guidance from the FDA. We're expecting to hear about that decision about the Pfizer booster very soon, and we'll share that information with you as it becomes available. A third dose for people who are immune compromised can help them build more protection against disease, so please talk to your healthcare provider before getting an additional dose. In Skagit County, as of today, we've had 8,728 cases. 7,284 are the PCR positive, that's the lab confirmed, and 1,444 the antigen positive, that's the rapid tests. We've had 90 deaths and 508 people hospitalized. Skagit County currently has a case rate of 593 per 100,000 over the last 14 days, and hospitalization rate of 13 per 100,000 over the last 7 days. A total of 167,600 vaccine doses have been administered in Skagit County so far. 70.8% of all Skagitonians 12 years age and older are partially vaccinated. Between September 1st and the 11th, 1,362 more Skagitonians got their first dose of vaccines. The Skagit County Fairgrounds testing and vaccine site changed its operations slightly this week. They're operating Monday through Friday from 5 to 8 p.m. out of the South Gate entrance. Testing services are now limited to people who live, work, and go to school in Skagit County. People must be 5 years old and older and must meet the following criteria: be currently symptomatic or recently exposed to COVID. Vaccinations are available to people 12 and older, and we will have first and second doses available, as well as third doses for certain immunocompromised individuals. The best way to stay safe is getting vaccinated, wearing your mask when in crowded situations. We're seeing the highest rate we've seen of cases since the beginning of the pandemic, and rates do not seem to appear to be leveling off at this time. And that information came from the Skagit County Health Department today. Any comments from the council? All right.
Mayor Gear,
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
I just have one last comment, personal comment to make regarding COVID. I really would like to acknowledge our county contact tracers and their professionalism, their knowledge, their helpfulness. When you get a positive test, they follow up. And I would say over 4 tests, they called us within 24 hours of a positive test, and they had to call for each one in our family. I was a little apprehensive to talk to them, kind of like if you were getting called into the principal if you've done something wrong. But I do want to assure people that from our experience, what they're trying to do is make sure that if you have frequented any high risk populations, such as medical facilities, homeless shelters, congregate living situations, senior living situations, things like schools, so that they can follow up with those places and do contact tracing with them. They also offer to provide for employers or businesses any kind of help. And then they also did a lot of work to contact my daughter who's in preschool to make sure that the school was aware and knew when she could begin her attendance again. So I talked to a number of different contact tracers, both at the county level and the state level, but our county health department has done a really incredible job. I didn't have to share anything that I didn't want to share. They didn't ask for names of people I had been around, but they are there to provide, professional guidance in an otherwise kind of confusing situation. So thank you to Skagit County, and thank you to those contact tracers who are working really overtime right now.
Yeah.
So thanks. That's all.
Yeah, and to your point, Christine, Skagit County has staff working 7 days a week to provide that service. So they've gone above and beyond in this pandemic. All right, at this time, we'll move on to public comment. And if anyone has anything they'd like to say to the council at this time regarding anything that's not on the agenda, if you want to raise your hand, we'll call on you. And that can be here or remotely. All right, I don't see any hands raised, so we'll move on to our consent agenda, item 5, A through D.
Mayor Dear,
Mr. McDougall,
I move to approve consent agenda items A through D.
all right.
Second.
And we have a motion, Mr. McDougall, a second by Mr. Carter. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We're now on to item 6, other business, resolution 3051, adopting updated city council procedures. This is a discussion with possible action this evening. Mr. Hoagland, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the audience. I put a couple of charts together, if you would indulge me. We'll go through these real briefly. Okay, so I put together a little history of the past year and a half dealing with COVID. So going back to March 16th, that's 2020. March 16th of last year, Mayor Geer made a declaration of emergency regarding COVID-19, and I included that in your council packets. That same day, that evening, City Council adopted Resolution 2082, which ratified the mayor's emergency declaration. And that had an expiration date of April 28th, so several weeks later. On April 27th, Resolution 2085 extended that original responding resolution through July 31st of 2020. And then you can see pretty much on a quarterly basis from there on, Resolution 2082 was extended. And 2082, we'll go through the outline of Resolution 2082, the city's response to COVID, or the city council response to COVID. But you can see this last resolution that was passed by council extending Resolution 2082 expires September 30th of this year, so the end of this month. But so that Resolution 2082, the last remaining significant element of that resolution is Section 3A, and that's the section that suspends the council procedures. And the reason those council procedures were suspended was because the procedures limit only one council member to participate in council meetings in absentia. And then it also limits the number of remote meetings to 8 per year per council member. And then many of the other elements of that Resolution 2082 have been addressed through other means. For example, a lot of those elements now we refer to reliance on the state and health department guidelines for those areas. So Resolution 3051, which we have for you for your consideration tonight, adopts council procedure revisions that would eliminate those limitations on those council procedures. So back to Resolution 2082, again, the original response to COVID. So there are several sections to the resolution. Section 1 ratified the emergency declaration. Section 2 outlines the city's response, directs the city to follow state and local guidelines, close city buildings, sanitize public areas. So those are many of those are no longer effective. The state and local guidance now include operation of public buildings, which was not the case back in March of last year. So Section 3 is the council procedures, and Section 3A is still effective, and that again is the section that suspends council procedures. Section 4, city budget, that is the part that adopted a hiring freeze, and that actually was replaced by the budget ordinance for 2021, Budget Ordinance 3078. And I did include, I did include a red line copy, if I can get to it now, a red line copy of that, that resolution. So this is Resolution 2082, council's initial response. All the whereas is about the COVID pandemic, and then the city's response. So essentially, Section 2A, city is committed to protecting public and staff by minimizing the spread of COVID-19. That's true regardless of whether it's documented in a resolution or not. These other sections have all been replaced or addressed by other means. For example, this section, City Hall being closed, was repealed as of June 30th of this year, with City Hall opening back up. The public library and public parks, both were repealed in March of this year, and those sections now refer back to the local health department guidelines. Section 3, again, 3A, this is the any rule or procedure adopted by council that would prevent or prohibit all city council members from attending meetings remotely. So that's the section that we're concerned about here. Again, this section, last section here is kind of just supports that Section 8. Any council rules inconsistent with this are hereby waived. And then Section 4 of the budget, the hiring freeze, and then non-essential equipment replacements are hereby suspended. And those, this is the hiring freeze has been addressed by the budget ordinance, and then the non-essential equipment replacements is essentially just our standard operating procedures now that we're continuing to operate by. Yeah, this is talking about expenditures for supporting remote work, et cetera. The plastic bag ban has been addressed by the state's declaration. So once the state's emergency declaration is over, the state's plastic bag ban will go into effect, and this will no longer be effective from a city standpoint. So back to where we're at now. So Resolution 3051, talking about updating the council procedures. I wanted to talk about that and then turn it over for your discussion. So the sections that we're updating is the sections that discuss participation in absentia. And then there's also a section that talks about the public addressing the city council. So that's this section right here. So this is the council procedures, and section 4.3 is a section that talks about participation in absentia. So part A remains intact. Participation in absentia means participation in a council meeting without being physically present. So section B would be revised to read, a council member participating in absentia must log into the city council meeting using city provided login credentials and the electronic meeting link published by the assistant to the city clerk. So it eliminates the need to contact the mayor if you're going to participate remotely. It eliminates the this section C was about being able to hear the entire proceedings. It kind of goes back to when we were operating with a phone in the council chambers, you know, set to you know, the public talking through the council member using the open phone to talk through. We've dealt with that for some time now. And then it also eliminates the limitation of one council member participating in absentia, and then it eliminates the maximum of 8 times. It also eliminates the recording of which council members were present and which were remote. So essentially, if you log in either remotely or you show up in the council chambers, you are participating, and that is essentially that. The other area that would be revised with this resolution is the section on the public commenting in council meetings. So there's a reference to the person addressing council speaking into the microphone. Obviously, if they, you know, this participating remotely would be effective for the public as well. So this would no longer be valid. And we also eliminated this section. I talked with our city attorney about this part, and she agreed it would be reasonable to eliminate this need to have somebody provide their address for the record. So essentially, though, those are the changes. The rest of it would remain unchanged. So that is, so that's resolution 3051. It would update those council procedures to allow unlimited remote login for council members and likewise for members of the public who wish to participate. So I'd be happy to answer any questions council may have.
Mayor Gear?
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hoagland, for your presentation and the background you've given and having everything in the packet. That was super helpful. I really appreciate the changes regarding participation by the public. I think that that's great. I think that remote participation provides the public more opportunities to participate when and how they'd like to. I think that's fantastic. There are 2 things that concern me about council member participation in absentia. I remember, I think it was 2019, we had a pretty good discussion about how many meetings were desirable for us to attend as council members. And we decided that 8 meetings being absent, which is not the same as participating remotely, was an appropriate number. I dislike the idea of democracy in absentia. I think that council meetings in person give the public an opportunity to show up if they'd like to and know that they can see their council members in person. We see each other in person. I appreciate the constraints of the pandemic, but I feel that this is too sweeping. I do not support us being able to always be in absentia no matter what. That means we never have to show up ever in person. And I really, that goes against the grain for me. So I'd like to have some conversation about what would be an appropriate and desirable set of requirements, whether it's there's a minimum we are required to attend in person if there's no pandemic. I'm open to conversation and learning what other council members think.
Mayor Gear.
Ms. Cleland.
Ms. Moulton hit the nail on the head when it comes to public comment. I think that makes a lot of sense and is completely fine. You know, we are not private business. they can do what they want. We are public servants. We have asked for our citizens' votes, and we are supposed to be available to them. And while the pandemic is a unique situation, I think that it's important that we continue to be available to them. And one of the most consistent ways to be available is the first 4 Mondays at 6 p.m. in council chambers. Now, the having what was discussed in 2019 and approved for having 8 meetings in absentia, and also contacting Mayor Gear or the mayor for a 24-hour notice. The 24-hour notice, I kind of appreciate, just so that we know how many physical bodies are going to be in those meetings, and just to keep people encouraged to attend in person. I think that we've had a lot of meetings prior to COVID where seeing the number of folks in our council chambers, nodding their heads when we have public comment, not because they may not get up and actually speak in the microphone, but they are reinforcing their opinions of other folks who have spoken into the microphone and shared their thoughts on whatever we're discussing. I think that's really, really important that we continue to have that expectation and standard for all council members. So my inclination would be to extend this, either 4 months for a quarter of the year, or 6 months, which would get us kind of through the winter season and possibly spikes in COVID. Maybe we would suspend it for another 4 to 6 months. But also, I personally, I'm willing to follow the state and local health guidelines. So if our caseload goes down, I want to be in the chamber with a mask on. To me, that is really important. It's great to be able to do things in absentia, and I think that having eight meetings available throughout the year to do that is a good path forward. But I am not comfortable at all just eliminating the requirement of being in person in the future.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. McDougall.
A clarifying question, because I don't really agree with that, but I'm also, it's okay if I'm in the minority. Are we making a distinction between in absentia and participating remotely? Or are we saying that's the same thing?
Mayor Gear?
Ms. Moulton.
I'm not sure if this question was for me.
For either you or.
Okay, so
Ms. Cleland-McGrath.
when I was looking at section 4.3, Mr. Hoagland, maybe you can bring that back up. It was section C is participating in absentia. And section E is no council member may participate in absentia more than 8 times in any calendar year. So when I say in absentia, I mean participating, not being absent without whether the council member is or is not excused. So I'm saying participating in absentia.
So same thing as like participating remotely.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure that there wasn't a difference. I didn't think so, but checking.
And Mayor Gear.
Yes, Ms. Cleland.
Mr. McDougall, I think you bring up a good question. My understanding was that was interchangeable with remotely. I'm willing to have more of a conversation about the limitation of only one council member being remote at a time. I think that's something that I'm more comfortable if we want to increase it to 2 or 3 council members are able to be remote for one meeting, because we've got this technology, I think, dialed in significantly better than we did in 2019. So I'm fine to discuss that part of 4.3.
Mayor Gear?
Ms. Moulton.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, really I don't really understand section C about, it sounds like the person doesn't have to be able to hear the entire proceedings. I'm not sure why that's crossed out or what that meant to begin with. Maybe Mr. Hoagland can explain that. But my real objection is really only to, yeah, I don't understand C, and E. E is where I have the discomfort. Of just eliminating that. That's where I want to kind of decide as a council what seems reasonable in non-COVID times. Yeah, but like Ms. Cleveland McGrath said, I'm comfortable with extending the part of, being safe during COVID and doing everything in absentia, according to state and local guidelines.
Mayor Gear, this is,
Mr. Hoagland.
I think section C was a kind of a carryover when we first started with remote meetings, and we didn't really have good technology. So we were putting a phone up on the dais and putting the speaker function on. And sometimes, we'd try cell phone with the speaker function on, and it was not very effective on either side, on either the council dais side or the remote users side. But so I think that was a carryover from that if you couldn't get a good connection, you would just drop off the meeting. But we've obviously have kind of figured that one out.
Mayor here.
Thanks.
Mr. McDougall.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a number of these clauses here probably existed, to address basically technology gaps and challenges. And even right prior to the pandemic, I know I had to participate in absentia a few times, and that system we had in place was also, it left some things to be desired. The system that we've had in place since the beginning of the pandemic, or shortly after the beginning, has been really effective, I think, and I completely support the idea of not limiting the number of participants in absentia to just one, because who knows, there's any number of circumstances where we may have two or more folks away. I also, I agree with the sentiment that we're absolutely elected to do the people's business. I don't see there being a very common instance where some council member would need to participate remotely more than 8 times a year. I think it would be pretty rare, but I also think it's a limitation that is kind of like arbitrary and unnecessary. If a person is sincere about pursuing their their public service as an elected official, they would do their best to do that and not necessarily have to have that regulation on top of them. So at the same time, if the majority of council feels that once we're post-pandemic, that limit should still be there, I know I can make it work, so it's fine.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Carter.
I'm with Bruce on that one, as having only been in actual council meetings for 3 or 4 months my entire time in office, it's hard to come up with a number, but yes, we are elected officials and we want to be there for people. And you're right, Carolyn, we should be available to our people. And just because we're not in person doesn't mean we're not available to them, and that we should make every available opportunity to be there. But yeah, 8 does make it kind of hard in some situations for individuals. And I'm for either increasing that number or limiting the 8, knowing that most everyone's going to be there anyway. And also technology is a lot different than it was a couple of years ago with the meetings, making it easier to participate remotely and being able to see everyone and hearing what's going on.
Mayor Gear.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. So I appreciate what you're saying, and having been doing so much remotely, it probably seems, it's almost starting to feel like a natural state, but it's an unnatural state for us to participate this way. And 8 times in a calendar year, that's 2 full months. So I agree that our council members are committed to being here in person as much as possible. I think that's true of all of us. I don't know for sure if future council members, as yet to be elected in 2050 or whenever that is, are going to feel the same way. Some people might be like, oh, well, I'm going to run for council, but I don't have to be there on Mondays. I can just show up remotely. I just think that that lowers the bar a little bit. And I want to trust to people being committed, but I think that we should still have that bar. Yeah, I think 2 months of in absentia during normal times is ample. It's almost 20% of the year that you could be gone.
Mayor Gare.
Ms. Cleland?
Yeah, Ms. Moulton makes the point. I mean, 2 months out of the year is a significant amount to be working remotely. I think that we have to remember that we've all gotten used to doing Zoom calls and Teams calls and all of these remote meetings because we didn't have a choice. But I think that there is a large portion of our general public who has not spent hours upon hours on these platforms. And while it makes our meetings and discussions more accessible to folks who are plugged into this type of technology, I think that folks who do not spend the majority of their time attending council meetings or attending committee meetings, when something comes in front of them, suddenly, either it's a public notice for something happening in their neighborhood or some specific item, we are making it significantly more difficult for them to participate because they can't just show up at 6 p.m. on Monday and walk into a room where they know City Hall has been. They're expected to have a computer and get online and log into a chat, this type of a room and discuss it. I just, at the right time, I feel like we're assuming that the general public is technically savvy. And while I think a lot of people are, it is not fair to assume everyone is. And so we have a responsibility to make it as easy as possible and actually look at each other's eyeballs and look at people's, bodily physical reactions to discussions and be held responsible for our decisions. And it's really easy to not be held quite as responsible when it's through a computer screen. And so I feel strongly that I do not want to see this, an unlimited amount of remote meetings for every council member. I think that we've made accommodations when council members are gone for extended periods of time. And I think we would do those accommodations in the future. But, being on council has a level of responsibility that you either are able to do it or it's not the right time for you to do it. And we have to maintain a high standard because our constituents have high expectations for us. I don't want to see this kind of go through and it would go through with the best of intentions, but it would take a long time to correct a mistake or a difficult situation. And I just see it kind of going off, the potential of going off the rails with, there's a lot of liability and potential of it going off the rails and not a lot of positive upside. I mean, I'm for, let's wait 4 months, let's wait 6 months. We're in a pandemic, but I am not comfortable changing it permanently.
Mayor Gear?
Yes, Mr. Carter.
I agree completely with the 8 meetings. I think that is generous. I kind of feel like, it's there to keep council members from being lazy and just calling in because they don't want to show up. But I would feel comfortable if we could put something in there that 8 could be extended for a little bit if it's pre-approved for career progression or military training, or there was an actual legitimate reason for it versus someone just didn't want to come in.
Mayor Gear,
Ms. Moulton.
Mr. Hoagland might know this too, but we have done that. So there must be a mechanism to do that, right, already?
Mayor Gear.
Mr. McDougall.
Sorry if I'm stepping into your answer, Mr. Hoagland. I think we did that for Mr. Carter, but that was to have an extended leave where he was away for training and did not participate. And so that was to get past a different council procedure where you only allowed a certain number of absolute absences.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Mr. McDougall. That's right. So it looks like that. I feel like we're all sort of coming around to the same sort of we're kind of in agreement here is what I'm feeling. I would be comfortable approving this resolution with the exception of section 4.3E. And then I guess what we would need to do is extend something to say that I don't know, what would we do with that functionally so that we continue doing what we're doing in absentia during the pandemic?
So Mayor Gear,
Mr. Hoagland.
I think you have probably have a couple of options. One certainly is we could revise the revise the resolution or just develop another resolution that would extend the provisions of resolution 2082 for another quarter, put it out through the end of the year. And then if we went that route, we could kick this to the committee level and spend a little more time on scrubbing the language and getting input. Or we could make these revisions if council agrees. We can make those revisions to kind of leave the language, the revisions as is, except for the maximum number of absences. Whichever way council feels.
Okay.
Mayor Gear.
Yes, Mr. McDougall.
I think given the fact that we have 3 council members not here tonight, maybe it is a good idea to simply extend the existing resolution where we've suspended council procedures, maybe extend it to the end of the year, and then we can revisit the longer term conversation. I think we can probably all get there. I'm intrigued by Mr. Carter's suggestion simply to keep that 8 number in there, maybe with a subclause where the council can take, special circumstances in consideration, that sort of thing. But would love, I'd like to get the input of the other 3 members as well.
Yeah.
Mayor Gear.
Ms. Hunt.
Council members, just so that you're aware, it is always council's prerogative to suspend your procedures at any point, which is how you have in the past gotten around, say, the 8 meeting limit if you needed to for a special situation. So that doesn't need special language to allow that to happen.
Thank you for that clarification.
Mayor Gear.
Yes, Mr. Carter.
And so that we use that to excuse before, but that could also be used to extend the call-in portion of it also, correct?
Correct. I think when that limit was less than 8, which it was in prior versions, we did extend that or suspend that clause specifically to allow more than 4, I think, at that point. Mm-hmm. So you have tools already in place to allow that.
Mayor Gear?
Ms. Moulton.
It seems that that is the only thing in question in this whole resolution. So I would like to make a motion that we approve this resolution as presented with the exception of section 4.3E.
There you go.
Mr. McDougall.
I think since Ms. Hunt clarified that, then yeah, I second.
All right, we have a motion by Ms. Moulton, a second by Mr. McDougall to approve this resolution with the exception of item 4E.
Mayor Gear, point of order.
Yes, Ms. Hunt.
Excuse me, if we adopt this resolution this evening without that clause, we have to have everybody back in chambers probably before you're ready to do that. You each only have 8 meetings then. In fact, you've already had those this year. You'd have to come back next week.
Okay.
That's your intent. So be it.
No, that's definitely
No.
not the intent.
So are you withdrawing your motion, Ms. Moulton?
I guess so. I just don't know how to proceed then.
Mayor Gear,
Mr. Carter?
what about this? I move to adopt resolution 3051, adopting the revised council procedures through the end of the year.
So I first of all need Mr. McDougal to withdraw. Did he withdraw his second?
I do,
All right,
yes.
All right. So
That would give us time to bring it back and then have everyone be able to discuss it in a couple months.
Okay. Go ahead.
Mayor, is there a reason we wouldn't? I mean, I'm pulling up the material from the agenda. Is there a reason we don't just extend resolution 2079, which was extended from September 27th? Is that correct, Mr. Hoagland? If we just extended that resolution?
Correct. That's, we could bring another resolution back next week that extended the provisions of resolution 2082 for whatever period of time you direct. We have been doing it on a quarterly basis. So, potentially through the end of the year.
So I would be inclined to do another quarter, just to get us through to January. I think December can get a little crazy,
So,
right? If we can bring that back next week.
so did Mr. Carter's die without a second? Okay. So do we have a new motion then? No.
Mayor
just-
Gear.
No,
Just wanted to come back. All right. Mr.
Well-
Hoagland.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So we'll prepare a resolution to extend the provisions of resolution 2082 for another 3 months.
And you'll bring it
yeah.
back next week.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, wow. All right, we got there. Really good discussion, everyone. This is important. I love it. Democracy in action. All right, we'll bring it back next week and address our resolution regarding council procedures. At this time, is there any member of the public that wants to add an additional comment? If so, raise your hand. All right, we're going to move on then to item 6B. This is Resolution 3052, establishing the city's use of the American Rescue Plan Act funds. This is discussion with possible action. Mr. Hoagland.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to share my screen again real quick. This was included in your council packet, just for ease of review. So this resolution essentially establishes a policy for the city to use the American Rescue Plan, and that the American Rescue Plan money that the city receives. So this is the latest round of COVID money that the federal government distributed. The city of Anacortes was allocated $2.89 million in two tranches. The first one we have already received. That was 1.3. Next year at some point, we're scheduled to receive the balance of that. So what we've done is, so some background on this to begin with. There were a number of things outlined in the federal guidance that came with this money that the money could be used for. And one of those items was broadband, which fits well into the city's strategic plan. But another item that this money could be used for was revenue replacement. And there was a formula established by the Treasury, and that formula was loaded onto the MRSC website. And our accountant, Heiko Miles, spent a good portion of time going into that worksheet and putting in all of the required data to determine what that level of lost funding was. So it wasn't us making the determination. It was essentially a big spreadsheet. We put in several years of historical financial data, and that worksheet then calculated like what the expectation for those revenues were through 2021, 2022. And what we found was that that entire balance of 2.89 million was less than what that calculation determined was our lost revenue. So using it as lost revenue makes it much easier for the city of Anacortes um, because it doesn't require then as many federal guidelines be followed. Um, Essentially, it just becomes general revenue, like the sales tax and utility tax that we lost because of the COVID crisis. But in both cases, either lost revenue or use for broadband, those were acceptable uses as far as the Treasury was concerned. But it was determined that it was a good idea that council did establish a policy identifying that we were receiving this money, and this was the plan for using those American Rescue Plan monies. So we just identify here in a couple of the whereases, cities receiving this $2.8 million. City council wants to spend that money to assist less served and low income residents. And a couple of ways that we're trying to do that is through broadband infrastructure improvements. And in recognition that the city is borrowing money for that fiber expansion, it just makes fiscal sense to use these monies to reduce the amount of debt that the city will be required to take out. And also we recognize that the city does offer a low income program for low income discount for qualifying utility customers. And we do have some number of utility customers who were affected by the COVID crisis and who were not able to maintain consistent utility billing payments. As a matter of fact, the council may be aware that one of the Governor Inslee declarations put a moratorium on utility shutoffs, and that moratorium ends on September 30th. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to get this in front of you tonight, because we've talked about the use of some of that money to help in the payment of some of those utility billing arrears. So we haven't got the final plan worked out. I had an idea about kind of a blanket forgiveness. I've talked with city attorney about that and finance committee a little bit, and that's probably not going to be an acceptable method of using that money, but we will develop a plan to use some of that money for at least some of our utility billing arrears. So that's kind of the background on the ARPA, the ARPA money. Yeah, so the identification at the bottom of the resolution, using that money for replacement of revenue lost, utility billing arrears, expanding city broadband, and then we also identified administrative overhead allowance, and that's just to identify that there is an amount of administrative cost that goes along with this. That's not money that we're going to directly bill to that ARP money. It's just consistent with how we budget city funds. So I would be happy to answer any questions that council might have.
So Steve, what the council's thinking, so you have down that you would like to adopt this next week. Is that after you go to finance and drill down on another couple numbers? Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's correct, Mayor. Thank you. So we did identify this as kind of first read tonight with an adoption of next week. This is on our agenda to discuss with Finance Committee on Wednesday evening of this week. But I will say that we did, 2 weeks ago, we did run this through the Finance Committee, so it has been seen at the committee level.
Okay, all right. Council, comments, thoughts?
Mayor Gear?
Yes, Ms. Moulton.
I would like to say thank you for addressing the utility billing arrears. I think that that's a great use of the funds because we do have people in pretty dire financial straits right now. And I think that's a big part of what this rescue plan funding is all about. So I'm definitely in favor of that. And also the broadband as a city utility that's affordable for everyone too. So I think this, I just want to say this looks good to me as written. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Any other comments? All right, we'll be bringing this back next week then.
Mayor Gare?
Yes, Mr. McDougall.
Actually, really quickly, Mr. Hoagland, could we perhaps, when we bring it back, or, you know, and for the finance committee this week as well, could we try to get a sense for ballpark what the amount that would cover the first two bullet points are, the replacement of revenue lost, as well as the utility billing arrears, just to get a sense for, you know, ballpark.
Sure. Yeah,
2.9
absolutely.
million, how much goes to this bucket, how much to this?
Sure. In fact, I can tell you the right before Heiko left this evening, he dropped off this printout with me. In fact, Mayor Gear, there's a copy of this on your desk as well. But as I said, it was a spreadsheet calculation that was put together. He put in all of our data, and the revenue reduction that was identified through that calculation was 5.4 million. So, you know, quite a bit more than the 2.89 that we were allocated. So that entire balance actually would be eligible for just considered to be revenue replacement. And the utility billing arrears, so we have both residential and commercial customers that currently have more than 2 months of arrears. And that's how when the shutoff system goes back into place, that's how our billing cycles work. Once a customer has two billing cycles, so essentially 2 utility bills that they haven't paid, the shutoff process starts. And that shutoff process is pretty comprehensive with you know, door hangers and additional mailings and things of that nature. So it's nearly essentially 3 months that customer is behind at that point. But when we looked at this, we met last week and took a look at what our arrears were, and they were around 65,000 at that time in total for residential and commercial, and that's for all 4 utilities.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Okay,
Mayor Gear.
Ms. Cleland.
Yeah, and Mr. Hoagland, can you just clarify? So we're going to, just for the public, we are going to just automatically forgive those utility bills and arrears. Is that correct? And it sounds like there might need to be some refinement of how that process takes place.
Yes.
Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So initially, that was my initial idea, and just keeping in mind the anything associated with this process of, you know, identifying the UB customers, going through those shutoff process, contacting, all of that is just done by a pretty small group that we have in the finance department. So I was thinking of the administrative burden, and that was why initially I thought, let's just do blanket forgiveness. Anybody that's more than 2 months, boom, we'll just, you know, anybody that had, you know, that chronic arrears on their bill. I spoke with the city attorney about that. She was pretty cool to that idea. So I do think we need to refine that process and have some a little more supporting documentation from those customers before we write those amounts off. So yeah, clearly more to come on that.
Okay, so we'll bring this up next week and maybe you can get a couple of those answers for us, Steve. All right, so anybody from the public would like to comment at this time before we move on? All right, so we'll move now to the final item this evening. It is item 6C. It's open for public comment. It's the R4 bonus height draft concepts. Mr. Meismer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council and the audience. This evening's discussion is related to the bonus height provisions of Anacortes Municipal Code section 19.42.0050, which would allow for an additional 10 foot over the base height of 40 foot in the R4 use zone. So that would give you a 50-foot tall building or 5 stories, and then possibly a roof deck area on top of that. The additional 10 foot would be allowed if the building contained 25% of the units less than 600 square foot, or provided a number of affordable units that meet the HUD criteria for affordability in Skagit County. A moratorium was adopted by the City Council on the acceptance of permit applications in the R4 use zone west of the commercial use zone for anything that's proposing to use the bonus site provisions of the small units. Public meeting was held February 25th, 2020. It was very well attended, and we had 3 planning commissioners and 3 city council members there, and we all discussed the various concepts to potentially deal with impacts from a building that might be 5 stories tall. Out of that came 7 different concepts to move forward with, and due to the pandemic, staff have been a little bit swamped in trying to get those before the council. And so this evening, I have a PowerPoint I'd like to share with council that discusses a little bit about those. And then the end result would be that staff will begin this process with the Planning Commission in October, hopefully the first meeting in October, move this there and then come back to council after the Planning Commission and the public have had an opportunity to discuss all these and potentially have a recommendation for the City Council. With that, I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen.
Yep, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, R4 building height discussion. So the reason that we're here is that throughout 2014, 15, and 16, the council adopted our 2016 comprehensive plan. And then in 2019, the council adopted the development regulations consistent with our comprehensive plan. And with that, there were the bonus height options, which were intended to encourage multifamily construction and kind of build that base of dwelling units within the city. We had a development application submitted for a 50-foot tall building in the R4 zone, and many of the neighbors became concerned about how that might overwhelm the existing single-family residential, predominantly single-family residential buildings in the area. This is a very poor map, unfortunately, about the R4 use zone is outlined in blue. And this is actually the bonus incentives for the R4, the commercial and the central business district. And here you can see the 2 options, the small units option, not more than 600 square feet, 25% of the units, and then the affordable units based on the HUD requirements. The building that is currently being constructed is using the 25%, not more than 600 square foot option to allow for that 10 foot in height. So Ordinance 3054 established the moratorium, and then Resolution 2068 reaffirmed the moratorium and adopted a work plan. Since the pandemic, the moratorium has been extended by Ordinance 3069, 3076, 3088, and it is about to expire again in October 12, 2021. And so I will be before council in October to extend this moratorium one more time in hopes that we can finish this work by the beginning of next year. And again, project timeline, we're at council today on the 20th. Extend the moratorium and planning commission public meetings on concepts September and October. October, November, December, planning commission meetings, a public hearing, and a recommendation to the city council. City council review and adoption January. I'm hoping not later than March to get this figured out. A little bit of background. Again, planning for the future. As you recall from our comprehensive plan, Population projection for 2036 is 22,293 people. We're right now at about 19,700, I think. So that's an additional 5,985 people and 2,260 units. So I just kind of captured that a little bit more here. And then, you know, we've been at less than 1% rental vacancy rate now for a very long time. In running our numbers 2 weeks ago, we are 80% existing stock of single family detached dwellings. We've only had 81 multifamily units built since 2010. And a lot of that has to do with what's left for land. Much of it is difficult to build on. And then of course, housing costs also are related to materials costs. Comprehensive plan update. Plan for accommodated and anticipated growth is what we're required to do while we still protect our forests, parks, wetlands, and minimize sprawl. Promote housing densities and types in all price ranges to meet a range of housing needs and respond to the changing needs and preferences, which when we look at what the council has adopted as part of our development regulations, we are reaching those goals. And here in a minute, I'll talk more about some of the units that are being built. Encourage infill on vacant and underutilized land. Provide development of multifamily housing in areas close to shopping, such as the R4, the commercial and central business district. And evaluate barriers to achieving increased density in multifamily and mixed use zones. These are some of the options that we might see as we start coming on through more multifamily housing, cottage housing, which cottage housing has taken off quite a bit lately, as well as townhomes. So since 2010, we've only had the 81 units compared to 849 single family units. But what I would like to add is that since the adoption in 2019 of the new development regulations, we've had 55 townhomes and 41 ADUs, accessory dwelling units. That's excellent. Before 2019, folks were not building townhomes. They weren't building condominiums because of all the restrictive state laws around insurance and various inspection criteria. So historic policies have favored the single family. Restrictive form intensity standards in the past on multifamily, townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, building costs, including parking is some of the barriers here, financing challenges. The condominium construction liability laws have in the past been very restrictive. As of 2021, some new legislative activity has lessened those restrictions and lack of incentive. If it doesn't pencil, they don't build them. So again, our 2019 development regulations update, changes to zone designations per the comprehensive plan have helped considerably. Reduced lot sizes have helped considerably in infill. We have, I recall we have 2 cottage projects in place right now, both moving along quite well. We have several townhouses, like I said, we've never had before. Accessory dwelling units, those that are building them seem to have found that those really work for them. There may be some changes coming from the state legislative activity in 2021 in regards to that about owners living on site. We have some new site and building design standards that help. It helps put the buildings in perspective to open space and pedestrian sighting as far as if, putting a building up closer to the sidewalk instead of parking. Parking code updates to bring requirements into alignment with actual parking demand needs. And the new housing, affordable housing provisions and bonus incentives, which of course is the bonus heights. These are a couple of examples of what we see for small lot with the 3,000 square foot and the 4,500 square foot lots, which if you've driven up off of, 25th, I think it is, the 3,000 square foot lot is being utilized to build a new home there as an infill project. It looks great. Building massing standards, good example here of what a building is going to look like with facade spacing. Accessory dwelling units, a little bit more detail on those. Maximum size of 900 square feet. And what we often see here is exactly what you see in this building in the picture. You see an accessory dwelling unit above a garage. So you have folks who have the main house garage, and then they build the accessory dwelling unit above it. There is room for parking on site. And our parking requirements now allow that only 2 parking spaces on site required for the main building, and you can have 1 space on the street if you have on-street parking. That makes it a lot more reasonable for a person to build an accessory dwelling unit. We had a parking study in 2015 that went along with the 2016 comprehensive plan, and it reduced the minimums for uses that often have underutilized parking. Central business zone, 50% less parking required to encourage more building in the central business district, and then introduce maximums to avoid excess costs and wasted land. And who needs all that pavement, right? Adjustments up or down allowed with a study and provided alternative transportation options. And we require new bike parking standards as well. So a little bit about multi-story building construction costs, and public improvements. First of all, the land acquisition costs, and then public improvements. You oftentimes will be required to pave a portion of the street or alley, sidewalks, curb, gutter, stormwater, and various other physical improvements, including landscaping. The building costs themselves, when you look at an elevator, once you get at 4 levels or more, and actually that number of 100,000 is very low right now. It's closer to 200,000, what I hear. Plumbing increases, electrical increases once you get up to that 4th level, 5th level. Foundation, subsoil site work and improvements all increase significantly. And then materials, once you reach up into that 5th floor, you've got equipment that you have to use to get everything up there. So it's a culmination of things that when you get past that 4th story, things can start to pencil out a little bit better, is what we hear from the developers. And typical parking stall construction cost ranges with surface, and this is a little bit outdated. This is from 2015. I think if we look at that in today's world, it's probably at least double that. These are just some examples of buildings that we have in Anacortes. Our library is 40 feet. Chandler Square Towers at 50 feet. Anacortes Family Center is at 42.7. And that's what's depicted on the left as well in their drawings. All of those came out fairly nice and aren't too overwhelming, in my opinion. A bit of context. This is a map that shows you the R4 use zones. You've got at the bottom of our screen the R4 live work overlay, and then the R4 zone on the east side of commercial, the med overlay on the west side of commercial, and then the R4 zone on the west side of commercial. One thing to note is how that R4 zone on the west side of Commercial Avenue splits the block through, and you can see here, splits the block, and so that's kind of unusual and makes it difficult, for those folks who may purchase a piece of property and it may have split zoning. So in 1994, permitted uses included, single families, multifamily, boarding, rooming houses, clinics, hospitals. And the height, maximum building height was 35 feet. And for non-residential space, it was 50 feet. And I don't recall anyone taking advantage of that, but they could have. In 2008, the use and height standards were changed to remove offices and galleries and congregate care and assisted living facilities, group homes from the permitted uses. And they took the maximum building height at that point to 40 feet. And this will get us into our draft concepts from here. And this
Mr.
gives you an
Meisner.
idea. I'm sorry, yes.
Mayor here. Sorry.
Yes, Mr. McDougall.
Really quick question. Would you mind going back to the map that showed the R4? I just wanted to confirm that, yeah. So the kind of the CBD, we also have the same height, sort of bonus height incentive, correct?
That's correct, Mr. McDougall. Our base height there is 50 feet. And then with the
Okay.
bonus, you can get to 65
You
feet.
go higher at the CBD. Okay.
Yes.
And then in the kind of orange strip that is Commercial Avenue, that commercial zone, what's our height there, and do we have an incentive there as well?
Yes, very good question. And yes, the bonus height allows us to go to 50 foot there.
In there. Okay, so it's like it's continuity, basically R4, that commercial orange strip, and then R4 again on the east side. And then the mixed marine, yeah, the height limit
Yes.
there with bonus, same? 50?
Yes, so the height limit there with bonus is 65 feet, similar to the CBD.
The CBD. Okay, great. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure I remembered it all.
Yes, sir. So we have from the February 25th meeting where we had extensive public comment and we had a fairly full council chambers, which we haven't had in a long time. We came up with 7 different concepts and had those on boards around the room and got many comments on them, which I did include the comments in your packets. And so, you know, as you can see here, we had item A, which is rezone the half block between commercial zone and O Avenue from R4 to commercial. And that's that split zone where you have a half a block right there. That's commercial. The other half is R4. So it could be somewhat difficult for folks to align a multifamily project in there and stay in the commercial zone. But some folks, you know, could do it, I guess. Modify the applicability of the bonus site provision to only apply to R4 study area east of O Avenue. And that really doesn't address the neighborhood concerns about larger structure and incompatibility and, you know, view blockages, things like that. Item C, modify applicability of the bonus site provisions to terminate at the east side of Vienna Avenue. And again, it really may not address the neighborhood's concerns about larger structures, things like that. D, eliminate the bonus site provisions for the entire R4 study area, which is that area west of the commercial use zone. And that may adversely impact multifamily development feasibility and, you know, reduce the diverse housing types, available diverse housing types. Tie the bonus site to mandatory affordable housing, rent control units, and no small unit option. Some developers have expressed many concerns about long-term monitoring and who's going to do that. So if there were a method where maybe the housing authority would take that on for little cost, then perhaps that would relieve some of those concerns, but it is there. Do not allow roof decks on buildings over a certain height. We've heard from several members of the community about how they feel that that's intrusive by having folks up on the roof deck looking down on their residences and so forth. Then refine the design standards to mitigate increased impact on streetscape and adjacent properties. And that could be where the upper floors, once you get to the 4th floor, maybe it steps back and then the 5th floor steps back as well. Those are a couple of options on that. And let's see, I think that's pretty much it on that PowerPoint. I do have some detailed PowerPoints on what the actual concepts look like. I could try and bring that up if you wanted.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Let's see if I can do that. Okay, is that working?
Yeah.
Perfect. So this is a representation of what concept A would look at like. And you can see here's the change from R4 to commercial. And that comes from that middle block over to O Avenue. And what that does then is it increases the commercial zone, you know, expansion. But then over in the other R4 portion over here, you know, that could stay at a maximum 40 foot in height, or it could also have the bonus. It has a couple of options there. And concept B is to remove this entire area here from the bonus site eligibility, excuse me, and then have this as commercial use zone here. So again, that's a half block over to O Avenue. From O Avenue to M Avenue, just remove the bonus site eligibility. Concept C is to remove from eligibility from N Avenue to M Avenue. So it's just that one block here. And leave the rest in. And I might mention that the Med O overlay zone allows for an up to 60-foot building. Concept D, removed from bonus site eligibility the entire area that is currently R4 here.
Mayor Gear?
Miss Moulton.
Thank you. Mr. Meismer, thanks. Just a quick question for clarity. The medical overlay zone, it's not just what's in the black box, it's everything that has the blue lines through it?
Yes, Ms. Moulton, it is
Okay.
the entire hatched area.
And that's permitted outright at 60, at 60 feet. That's not a bonus height. It's just anything, it could be 60 feet, just straight up.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Concept E, and this is the low income, and I'll admit that these numbers are not right at this time. I hadn't had a chance to research them and get them all put together. But that's one of the options, is to require that if you want to use the bonus site provision, you provide the required number of affordable units. Concept F is, you know, don't allow rooftop decks. We've had a little bit of concern about that, where folks don't like the idea of someone from up above looking down on them and spying on them, I guess.
Mayor Gear?
Miss Moulton.
Thank you. Do we have any restrictions on drones in town? Like airborne drones that fly around and take pictures of people? Does anyone know? I know this is a total tangent.
I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
My understanding is that you're supposed to be licensed by the FAA, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess my point being that I think people are a lot more likely to be spying on you with a drone than they are from their rooftop deck. Anyway,
Yeah.
just an aside. Thank you.
Yeah, so Mr. Meismer, if the rooftop decks were stepped back, would that help that?
It very well could, yes. If the rooftop decks were stepped back about 6 to 8 feet, that would still provide a gathering place, and I think that would probably avoid most of those concerns.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking when I'm looking at the drawing.
Yep.
Okay.
Mayor Gear.
Miss Cleland.
Yeah, so I see the red X. Is it fair that for the public to think that this is still under discussion and not completely removed from an option when we are talking about what can happen? And maybe it's a nuanced amount of how high the deck is, or a step back, but I hope that that's still up for on the table. Is that correct?
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Cleveland. Yes, all of these are still on the table, up for discussion with the community at the Planning Commission level and ultimately at the City Council level. Yes, none of these have been, shall we say, stricken from comment.
Mayor Gare?
Mr. McDougall.
Oh, Mr. Meismer, please continue if you were not done.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay. Couple questions on the back on your kind of concepts, advantages and disadvantages, and specifically since we're on the rooftop deck, the disadvantage listed there is reduces developable area and may make feasibility more challenging. Does that just mean like not having a rooftop deck or shrinking the rooftop deck by having setbacks? Is that what we're referring to as developable area?
That's correct.
Okay, got it. So it's basically a smaller or eliminated amenity, but this is not square footage that is being lived in. Just it's an on-premise amenity.
Correct.
Okay, great.
So the rooftop decks, thank you. The rooftop decks can also be used to provide a certain percentage of the open space that is also required by our code. So they can balance actual open space on the ground level and open space up on the open rooftop deck. And that's part of their gathering space and open space requirements.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for that. The other question I had on the concept scorecard, concepts A through C on the disadvantages, it does not address neighborhoods' concerns. I see A through C as all kind of compromises between, the entire zone has the bonus height versus, varying lengths of less, like a shrinking of the amount of that area that has the bonus height opportunity. So is it that it does not address neighborhoods' concerns or like does not eliminate neighborhood concerns?
It does not eliminate neighborhood concerns. Okay. Better phrased, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Concept G is one where we spoke about having a horizontal step back, and this gives you a little bit of an example on that. And is an option, though I've heard from a couple of builders that they feel that that is not a very reasonable option when it comes to construction. But you do see this in other towns where they have buildings 4 and 5 stories in height. And then in the Central Business District, the council adopted a requirement for when you're near Old Town, you use a 45-degree angle and come back from the 10-foot setback or whatever that setback might be up to the building. So in other words, this would create a step back in the building as you come up to that 50 foot. And by the time you got there, you could be 20 feet from the property line. Therefore, not looking at such a bulky building. So that's all I have in slides for the council this evening. From this point, what we'd like to do is, I would like for staff, myself, to begin our work with the Planning Commission, moving forward with these concepts. And I'm certain that other concepts might come out of the public meetings of the Planning Commission. We'll vet those to the Planning Commission and then work our way back into the City Council so that the council will have that recommendation from the Planning Commission as well. I expect in October, I'm hoping the first meeting in October, but we've got a few things ahead of this already on the agenda. So at least by the end of October at the Planning Commission level to refresh everybody's memory on the R4 bonus height provisions and begin moving forward with some public comment, public meetings, public hearing, and then back to City Council with a recommendation.
Nice. All right. Very, very good, Mr. Meismer. Thank you for a great presentation. Any additional comments, council? Members of the audience, anyone that would like to make a comment?
Mayor Gare?
Yes, Mr. McDougall, go ahead.
I had a quick question on the early in the presentation stats, Mr. Meismer. Basically mentioned there's the 81 multifamily units have been built since 2010. Do we know how many multifamily units have been either filed for or permitted since the adoption of the new regulation? Ballpark.
That's a great question. I'll have to look that up. We haven't had that many multifamily
Okay.
other than the one 5-story building. I think. But could-
Mr. Meismer, going off of what Councilmember McDougall just asked, does that include like Anacortes Family Center units in that
If-
81 units?
Yes, it does.
Oh, wow.
So that
So
number would-
market rate is significantly less.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I think of note here is the number of townhomes that we've seen in the past 2 years, which and in my 28 years here, I've not seen that many townhomes in 3 years.
That's definitely good.
And when we talk townhomes, are those typically 2 or 3-story homes?
Typically 2.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for the presentation. You've heard our, planning commissions or planning committee's comments on this. I just always want to reiterate, we have limited space. And when this comes before planning commission and the public participates and makes comments, I think it's always important to go and walk those blocks. It looks like a lot of opportunity when it's on a map, but when you actually go block by block, street by street, and see the investment that's happened with newer buildings, right? That they're staying what they are. It really reduces the number of properties that are eligible for redevelopment. So I just think that that's important to factor in when we're looking at how we make modifications to this R4 zone.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Very good, good discussion, good presentation. We'll be looking to hear what the Planning Commission does. All right, at this time, I will, unless there's something else for the group, I'm going to adjourn the City Council meeting. Have a lovely evening. Thank you all. Good night.